welcome to the Discovery Collective podcast. My name is Emily, we have Dennis here and also Virginia, and the three of us make up the Discovery Collective, and this is our podcast. This is the first time we have all got together, all three of us, to have a conversation, and it kind of marks the Discovery Collective moving into a trio where it once was a duo. And so we thought this was a really beautiful time to bring all three of us in for a discussion about one of the most, fundamental building blocks of growth and well-being and leadership and life, and that is belonging. What it means to belong, why it matters to belong, why belonging is important for leaders, for organizations, and for every human being that's navigating what is a pretty wild and chaotic and unpredictable time. So maybe the way we go around and start is just to do a bit of an intro. So Dennis, do you want to start off with a little bit of an intro and then we'll go to Virginia, and that way we can make sure that we're introducing everyone that is part of the Discovery Collective.
Absolutely. As some of you have possibly already met us, myself and Emily have been working on this Discovery Collective for a few years now. And Virginia's kind of been in the background for a little while, and we're trying to see if we can lure her into the collective with us, and having a very wise soul with us has just been wonderful. So, and getting to know Virginia over the last few months, I think the depth of conversation has grown, and we've worked a lot on these subjects. Virginia's quite a talented individual. She's added a lot, just another level, I think, or another dimension to the collective, and being the entrepreneur, the psychologist, and now the scientist, psychologist, doctor. I don't know. How would you describe yourself, Virginia?
Oh, thanks. Thank you to both of you. And I guess, how to describe myself. It's getting easier because of the belonging I'm finding with the two of you. So really wonderful to be able to start speaking about that. Just a little apology in advance. I've got very unstable internet connection today, and all this tech stuff is very new for me. So I'll work on that, and hopefully that'll be better and better each time that we meet. First and foremost, I guess I'm a person that's always asked the question why, and from very early age my parents were good enough to let me ask why, and that to me is about understanding, but also about connecting things and having integrated ways of understanding the world, but also integrated ways of feeling about ourselves in the world, and how we're connected to not only the other people but everything about nature and and our environment around us, and all of those kind of little cause and effect things that happen even if we don't notice. So it's been a funny old journey. It was a lot of questions when I was a kid, and loving school and loving learning, and then the psychologist part, trying to understand other humans, was there, and that was my first port of call in study. And then I went on a kind of a sideways but definitely related journey about making a difference to connection and belonging as a police officer, and then eventually back to psychology as a practicing clinical psychologist and researcher, as Dennis has kindly mentioned there. So that to me is about trying to measure things like belonging and people's sense of self-efficacy, and particularly for others that are interested in fostering that in people, and that is the leaders of the world, and that's not just people that are in positions of, I guess, identified leadership. That's the kids that want to make a difference. It's the people that are leading from within their families, and people that are interested in well-being and growth from whatever angle that is. So thank you so much for letting me be part of this, you two.
You know, as you're speaking, I'm thinking, what are the common threads here? Like, what is it that, because we all come from really unique and different backgrounds and different perspectives, live in different places, but there is an innate curiosity. And I think that whether we're talking about being an entrepreneur or being a psychologist or being a researcher or being a scientist, it really comes down to that drive of curiosity. And that curiosity asks many questions. It asks, how can we be more connected? How can we feel better? How can we do better? How can we improve the life of not only ourselves, but our teams and our communities and our globe? And so I think this is really what's bringing the three of us together, this innate curiosity around humanity, around how we strive for betterment and progress and being inventive, but at the same time pushing for well-being and pushing for all of us to feel well and to be celebrated in our individuality. So that really is what the Discovery Collective is about, and seeing all of our faces here today for the first time and hearing all of our voices come together for the first time in this way really reminds me of that. And I think that this conversation about belonging is a really beautiful starting point. You know, I think that when people think about well-being and they think about growth and they think about leadership, you know, maybe other things come to their mind about what is foundational or what is fundamental to those concepts. But from our conversations, we always land back at what are the foundations of all of these things, of well-being, of growth, of leadership, and belonging really is at the core.
Yes.
And what I would love is to have a really kind of rich and diverse conversation among us about how we define belonging, why it matters. Like, what is our rationale for believing that belonging really matters? And why are we pushing for that to be at center stage rather than an afterthought? And maybe kind of finishing off with our solutions or ideas around moving forward, so people can kind of feel empowered in this conversation. So they're not just sort of learning and gaining insight, but there's also a sense of like, where to from here? Because if I think about like the world at the moment, whether we're talking about being at work or being at home or just being in the world, belonging seems to be one of those elements that is so needed, but also feels really precarious at the moment. You know, there's lots of ways in which belonging is being frayed and fragmented at the moment. So let's do a little round robin of people's definition of belonging. Like, when you think of belonging, right, what does that actually mean for you? And what I'm really interested in is not only kind of what your dictionary definition is of that, but how have you come to understand belonging through your lens and your wisdom and your experience? Because that is so rich. Who wants to kick off? Den, did you want to have a go?
Yeah. I'll have a go.
All right.
I guess for me, belonging was always being an important part of something that's greater than yourself, something that's larger, something that's it's community. I see belonging in a lot of different ways, and through the eyes, even as a child, when I was part of my grandparents. As one of the child, we grew up next to my grandparents' house, and every Friday night, my mom and her sisters and her brother have caught up there for forever until they went to their home, I suppose. And there was this kitchen thing that would happen. And there's a sense of, you know, as a child, I would watch it, and I felt something very special in that circle, in that environment. And then I made a lot of friends. Then I moved. Then I got really sick, and I moved to this other city, and it was an English city. And I could only speak French at that stage. And my parents dropped me off at an English school thinking, oh, he'll just learn English. And I didn't know any English. I was sitting around, and all these people like, blah, 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 blah. And I'd just say, my name is Dennis in French. And they're all looking at me going, mon nom est Denis. And they're like, they had no idea what I was trying to say. So I didn't fit in. And I was the last child chosen on the sporting teams. And I was the last one in the corner when they're doing dodgeball. And so I felt this real sense of not being part of something. And then as I grew a bit older, we went back to my hometown, and I felt this connection again with family, with friends, and I thrived as an individual. And I felt this really intense feeling of importance, I suppose, and that I matter. And then after speaking to this friend of mine a few years ago, and we're talking about, you know, our greatest fear, and he was talking about the concept of rejection. And as a child, we're hardwired to fear rejection from mother, from tribe, from community. From mother, you die. From tribe, you may survive, but you'll never thrive. But from communities, it's, you know, and I kind of felt that when I was really young. So for me, there was a need and a desire to fit in. And then the opposite of that fear of rejection is belonging. So, and then we'll come back to this, whether it's a need or a desire. So for me, it was really important. And then I joined, you know, the military as a reservist, National Guard guy, and I saw that. So, and I'm really curious with Virginia as well, like it's something like in the police force or the military, or, you know, there's this whole sense of belonging that's created, and a lot of these people often that leave the military seek that again because they felt part of something again, and then when you're ostracized from that, I think there's a real, you know, there's a kind of a dysfunction that probably occurs. So that's that's without going in the entrepreneurship world as well. So we'll come back to that one. Virginia.
Yeah, so many wonderful ideas there to pick up on, Dan. And I guess, you know, in addition to what you said about the experience of belonging, for me, there's definitely that part of something. And the other part for me, both when I've experienced it and then when it goes away, is this idea of welcome no matter what, no matter how I show up, you know, no matter whether it's my best day or the day where I'm really struggling, there's still a space for me, and it's a safe space. So there's a sense of that protectedness when you're there, and that you don't lose your place, lose that,
yes,
you know, part of, I guess, the seat at the table, even if it is your not great day or your worst day or the day that you didn't perform well. So that's my experience of it. And I guess from a definitional perspective, you've touched on some really critical things there. We speak about it a lot. You know, certainly when I've set up psychology practices and kind of define spaces for people to be in, the concept of belonging and, you know, that being able to see individuals for their uniqueness and them be welcome no matter what has been foundational. It's written in our curriculums for little kids. You know, when we look at early childhood curriculum, it's identified as one of the central tenets, but it's actually not very well understood from a scientific perspective. And those things you're talking about, I guess, rejection and abandonment, and, you know, all of us have talked lots about attachment and being able to feel safely and securely attached to some key others, some other humans, and sometimes it's attachment, well, definitely it's attachment to place and space. But I guess the other framework that I've come to view belonging through is self-determination theory, which is needs, psychological needs, and those are autonomy. So that sense of I'm empowered in this space. I'm not only kind of welcome to show up, but people are, you know, really giving me a sense of autonomy and allowing me to be self-directed in the space. The second need that comes from that very well-researched theory is competence. So that's that I actually feel like I can, you know, I can make a difference, I can contribute. And then the third part of that is described as relatedness by the authors, and those authors are Deci and Ryan, if anyone's interested in going on a self-determination theory journey. But I guess, you know, when we've talked about it, and certainly when I've tried to operationalize this in organizations and, you know, in relationships, we probably think of it more as connectedness, you know, the sense to which I am interdependent with others and that we're on the same wavelength, you know, and that's probably when I feel a sense of belonging as I do with you guys. It's that, and it's that even if we come to a space and I'm on this wavelength because my tech wasn't working, or I've, you know, had a crappy morning or whatever, you guys are on different wavelengths.
Yeah.
It's almost like we can make the space so that some of us might come up a little, I might come down, and all of a sudden we're in tune. And attunement, I guess, is the other part of belonging, that, you know, that feels important to me. And then the science is kind of helping us understand is a critical factor. Lots of words. Sorry, Em.
You know, I feel like I checked out of my self-appointed role. Like I thought I was coming into this being like, right, here I am. I'm going to help bring things together. I'm going to help guide this conversation. But I just kind of got lost in both of your definitions and both of your stories and both of your narratives. And I became a little bit more like a listener for a moment, which was lovely. And I think it speaks to the importance of speaking about belonging as something a little bit more in depth than just like, well, I belong to a family by default, or I belong to a community by default.
Yes.
And I love the way that the definitions that you've both given span both a felt experience, as in like what it's like to belong. And what I see in when we think about felt experience of belonging, and I see this in clinical work, I see this in organizational work, is that it manifests not just as a nice feel-good emotional experience. Oh, it's nice to belong. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy. It actually extends to being almost like a physical state. Like, you know, that people's shoulders kind of drop a little bit. They start to breathe a little bit deeper. And then what happens is that then empowers their physiology and their physicality to be more thriving and well. It sort of helps the brain integrate. And so what I see, especially in clinical work, is the more that there is true belonging, the more the brain is empowered to actually work to the capacity that it's capable of. And if we're thinking about organizations or teams, we want these productive, creative, inventive, intuitive team members. But in order to get there, we need to create the right conditions. And for me, belonging is one of those conditions. And there's a really interesting school of thought that's coming out of at the moment, that belonging is actually equivalent to food and water in terms of human need. So instead of thinking, oh, as long as we've got food, water, and shelter, we're going to be fine as a human being and as a species, we actually now come to understand that there are human psychological needs that are just as imperative to survival as food, water, and shelter. And one of those is belonging. And the science is letting us know that. And so what we're seeing, especially in kids that have a lack of belonging, is it actually changes the development of their brain. And so that's, I guess, why we're trying to bring this to the forefront, because it's easy as an organization or a team or as a leader to go, oh, look, that's something that we'll get to once a year at the Christmas party. You know, we'll nurture belonging once a year when we all do a team day, and they can put it on the back burner. But what happens is that undermines their attempts for progress, for productivity, for innovation, for creation, for forward movement. And so it's really exciting to start to think about how we can bring belonging in to the center of organizations and leaders' thought processes. Any observations that you guys are having about the way belonging is playing out in your teams, in your work, in your movements through society and community at the moment? Like, what are you guys noticing? And I say this because I realize that both of you are coming with not only incredible personal experience, but I'm literally holding company with people who have created organizations and businesses, you know, people who've done a PhD, people who have coming here with so much rich knowledge. I'd love to hear from both of you. What are you observing about belonging at the moment? Dan, do you want to start with that?
Well, I guess for me, I see there's a lot. There's so many facets in this, in the concept of belonging, and I've seen people prey on belonging. I've seen people create this sense of prey on fear and creating a sense of I guess power as opposed to belonging, but masking it and making it look like a sense of belonging. And when it's not done through genuine care, it falls apart. And there's a lot of division currently right now, and as this pandemic, we've got social distancing, we've got masks, we're seeing eyes, we're not seeing expressions anymore. And I think there's potentially a crisis of belonging. As we mentioned the other day, we had a conversation on that. And but as an entrepreneur, back in when I first got into this business that we created, for us, it was really, really important to set that a sense of belonging, a genuine sense of belonging, and living the values in which we set up as an organization. And that return on investment, on that emotional investment on individuals and people, and it came at a cost to us. And a lot of people thought, oh, well, Vertec was such a great company to work for. And for us, it was really hard because we're trying to maintain this. And often the parents are the last people to be rewarded in the family unit, because, you're trying to maintain this sense of balance and equilibrium. And at the same time, as you said something really powerful earlier, there's a want, but people feel safe in a sense of belonging. When we are safe, we know ourselves that you said your shoulders drop, you breathe easier, you're not on guard, and it's more than giving you a jersey with a number on it. Belonging is genuinely contributing to that. And what can I contribute to this team or this group or whatever it is, and identifying that individual for who they are, what they bring to the table, recognizing the efforts and their skills. And then for me, it was an engagement piece. And that's what often is missed in, I guess, entrepreneurship or in business. And these teams talk about, a sense of belonging or creating the sense of belonging, but it's kind of, I feel it. So I walk in an organization, and I've been coaching for the last 5-6 years now and trying to help organizations develop culture. And culture generally, when it's forced, that's the thing that goes missing in my experience, I suppose. Virginia?
Yeah, I was just smiling on the inside and on the outside too, just hearing someone who is an entrepreneur speaking about the felt nature of this versus the forced nature. And I guess, that's the tricky part, isn't it? Because we know the job of when we bring people together as an organization or some kind of group that has shared goals, there's usually a purpose, and that's very much an outcomes-based thing. And definitely when all three of us have talked about leadership and leadership trainings, we can focus a lot on those outputs and what we need this group of people to do. The difficulty is that, I guess my experience too is maybe what you're saying, Dennis, it feels like lip service at times. Like we can talk about culture and we can talk about, we have words and language is fabulous. And, hearing you share your experience of not having language that's shared with the people around you and how that was for non-belonging or unbelonging, we'll probably together we'll make up words like we do often. So unbelonging, maybe that's our first word that we've made up as a trio.
I love it.
Yeah, the language is super important, but it's actually just the surface. There is so much belonging that can happen even in the absence of words. And I suppose the most foundational example of this is the story of the boy that grew up with wolves. He actually could belong with another species that didn't have the same verbal communication mechanisms, but could communicate and find a way to work together so that everyone had their part, everyone felt safe, everyone understood the terms on which we're together, even without a shared language. And so what I see, both as a clinician who works as I guess to diagnose neurodevelopmental, so brain development stuff that Em's alluded to, where through no fault of their own, people's capacity to do the languaging, to do the belonging stuff that we can do with our faces and our bodies is going to require support. It's the fact that so much of being with the other humans and belonging, in these kind of shared spaces is unpredictable, that makes it hard. And so I guess, when Em's wonderful question around what am I seeing at the moment, and maybe like, why is this so important? Being able to negotiate a world where there isn't the right answer every time, where it does need to feel safe, means that organizations, mums and dads, partners, people even with themselves in belonging, because that's another type of belonging. Can I belong in me? Is it safe for me to be integrated with myself? And for a lot of people, that's actually hard. We can't show up and be present with ourselves a lot of the time. And that's what we work on. That's okay. We work on that. Is having, I guess, a framework, a set of principles that make the world predictable when the world is not. And so for us, in our journey, that's the values, that's the roots of our discovery collective tree. And in society, I guess we formalize those things as rules, and in organizations we might have a statement of values. The tricky part is where we have these things written down and we might say we're about respect or we're about inclusivity. But then when the actions, are like, oh, that doesn't really feel like inclusivity, that's when it gets tricky to belong, because values, or that shared principle where even when we don't have an answer of how to be, we're not sure what our seat at the table will look like, if we can drop down to that, but we're always about these things, that's how we create the template. That's how we make it okay to show up no matter what. So I guess what I'm noticing is at the moment, when we need to respond to so many things that feel like threats, what happens, as Em's started to explain, the human brain can't operate in the part where we look for openness, where curiosity is unbridled, where it's easy for us to adopt approach-based goals, which are, okay, we're moving towards something rather than just moving away from the threat. That becomes so hard. And we actually operate from the parts of our brain that are just fight, flight, or freeze, which is tricky.
Yes. Yep.
So when we think about belonging, and that's inclusive and feeling like I've got a space, when the world is sending us a lot of threat messages, it becomes really difficult to actually allow that for people, because we don't even have the parts of us online that can make that easy. What's your thoughts, Em?
I'm just thinking about the threads here, and there's a few things that I guess I feel like I'm picking up. One is the idea of belonging is I have a seat at the table no matter what. Not just I have a seat at the table, because that statement's incomplete. And I think perhaps there's a bit of a lost art at the moment of how to disagree without losing connection. My sense at the moment is that when we start to disagree, that is, we have a different idea, we have a different opinion, we have a different history, we have a different body, we have a different mind. What happens is that disagreement is experienced as threat. Yes. And in that moment, there is a loss of connection. And for me, belonging is we as in whoever is in that community or in that team, we can disagree and still remain connected. Now that's an art form.
Yes.
I think the trickier the conditions, the more threat there is, the harder that art form is to perform.
Yep.
But I think that part of our work, and the reason why we have married entrepreneurship with psychology and science, is so that we can actually offer people skills and strategies and transformation that allows them to really master that art form. So as a collective, for them to be able to disagree and have diversity, but still weave through together these threads of belonging. So that's kind of one of the things that I was picking up. And then as you were speaking, Virginia, my mind always does this thing where it likes to create a movie out of what people are saying. I'm a very visual person, so everything turns into an image. And both you and Den had alluded to the idea of sometimes we've got lip service belonging.
Yes.
And I think of it, what I imagined was somebody drinking a can of Coke. They're really thirsty. They're really dehydrated. They've been out there doing all this active stuff, and they're drinking this can of Coke, believing that it will rehydrate them.
Diuretic.
And in the beginning, it kind of does. Like in the beginning, it does a good enough job of wetting the lips, and you know there's some cool stuff going down your throat and it's fizzy, and you're kind of like you're in this under this illusion that you are being rehydrated because all of the signals of hydration are kind of landing on you. But then kind of 20 minutes later, you're like, why do I have a headache? Like, why am I not thinking properly? And it's because as like seductive and tasty and refreshing as the Coke was, it actually didn't have the ingredients for true rehydration. And I think of belonging in a similar way. Like when we do lip service belonging, and when an organization does lip service belonging, what happens is it feels kind of good. It feels a little bit like a can of Coke. We're all here together. You know, maybe we're having a team bonding experience. People are using a bunch of fancy words. I get a sense that maybe we're all here together. But what happens is that a week later, a month later, we realize that that kind of lip service belonging didn't do the job. It didn't rehydrate us. It didn't serve our soul. It didn't help us feel safe and coherent and connective. And it didn't create the conditions for our brain to thrive. And I guess here I am, the psychologist, always interested in what's happening in the brain. But the brain needs certain conditions to do well, to be creative, to thrive. And lip service belonging doesn't do that. It doesn't create the conditions for the brain to thrive. And so what I'm so taken by in terms of our work here at the Discovery Collective is the absolute commitment to belonging, or any other concept. It could be psychological safety, it could be creativity, it could be performance. We're really interested in what that looks like as the real authentic version, not as the lip service version, and empowering people to just have that skill, to know how to do that, to know how to live out belonging, how to have a conversation and disagree but still stay connected. How to go through moments of uncertainty like we are at the moment without losing our sense of connection and compassion. These are really interesting questions, and there's no silver bullet here. It's not like we're like, oh, just do this one thing and you'll nail it. It's a lifelong process of learning. Did you guys want to speak to, and maybe I'll start with you, Den, how do people, humans, whether they're in families, whether they're in partnerships, whether they're in a local soccer team, or whether they're in a multinational organization, what's your sense of how do people really foster genuine, true, rich, unconditional belonging? What's your sense? Do you have any experience around that, or your expertise around that?
For me, it has to be genuine. If you don't feel it yourself, again, we talked about the words, we talked about the language, and I can say one thing and do something completely different. You can have a policy on belonging and inclusivity within the organization, and 3 pages later, you've got a performance report which you have to deliver. So it starts on the level of leadership for me, and so many people, they're trying, and this is where the organization, my previous organization, has gotten large, is very, very big. And it's really difficult when you're in these large organizations, because again, as we talked about in the past, there's lots of different forms of leadership. And a lot of people go into the role for they genuinely want to make a difference. But they still expected to attain a certain result. But often people go in it for the wrong reasons. They go in for the power. They go in for the prestige. And I've had that many people in the last 5-6 years going, oh my God, I thought when I went in this role, I would get elevated and it was going to be this whole wonderful thing. And all of a sudden I'm having to deal with people all the time. And it's like, it's not delivering. So you've got the manager who's gone into the leadership role. And for me, I think there has to be a sense of worthiness from self. I think Virginia touched on, the belonging, the first relationships with yourself. So you need to feel a sense of worthiness, but you also need to fit in. There's some groups that I didn't fit in, and that's fine. I just had a completely different view and outtake. Now, I've recently spoke to someone who was in this very large organization on a ridiculous salary compared to the rest of the world, and was compromising his well-being to maintain this status quo. And he was just being silenced. And I think because he lacked ruthlessness, he didn't grow within that organization, because they wanted that hard-ass leader to be within this group. But yet, everything else below is all these words on walls that have absolutely no connection with what is actually happening within those organizations. And he left on his own accord, and everybody's just wondering, how could you leave this you're in this beautiful, comfortable, financial position, yet what's the cost of that? What's the cost of you giving? So, because that organization does not have belonging in people's best interest at heart. It's financially driven, it's shareholder driven, and it's large, it's fast, it's huge, and it's, and people get lost in that. So it's easier when you're small. And when you grow, that's when the real challenge occurs. However, if you have a leader that's genuinely is beyond the language, who actually genuinely feels the importance of bringing people on a journey, and it's not easy, because people check in, check out. There's an acceptance in that. There's an understanding that is going to happen. It's like a father or a mother or a partner. We all go on these little tangents, and we go on our own little journey sometimes, but we come back and we meet, and there's an acceptance, and there's a safety in that. And I think it has to be genuine for me. And it starts at that level of leadership, and it's felt, and it's beyond all language, it's beyond words. And if you don't really genuinely feel it, and that intention's not genuine, you'll never set that foundation. You can have splinters of groups that hold it within leaders, within organizations. And I find that all the time. And there's some great leaders out there that are at the mercy of these organizations, and they're carrying so much on their back because they're trying to change everything above, protect their people. Because a proper leader, as we talked about in the past, you're a guide, and you're providing safe passage. You're giving people the ability to feel part of something, and sometimes that comes at a cost, because you're fighting for that. So for me, I guess that's the thing. If it's genuine, it's easier, but it's never easy as such, as the organizations grow. And even as a dad, as a friend, it's having that, for me, it's really just being open and accepting of whatever's going on within other people. And again, we walk away, we just come back home with the nice warm light. The back door is always open, and, it's having that place. V?
Yeah. So I've kind of been writing down my little cheat sheet of strategies that are coming from what Den said about, how to kind of cultivate and foster belonging in my own life at the moment when it's, it is trickier. just picking up on that genuineness, and that I guess that's the first message that really stands out. You should feel it, like you should actually feel it. And that's about authenticity and genuineness. And that actually we're saying, and not just us, the neuroscience is saying, listen in your body, trust your gut.
Yes.
The gut actually knows. So then my head was going on you with a journey about, that's really easy, maybe when we're talking about in our families or small organizations, and then just noticing even in the organizations I've been in, the bigger it gets, the harder it gets. And I guess in science, what we look for is integrity and fidelity. And those things are about, in a research perspective, that if this is the treatment or this is the protocol that's in place, looking at all levels as to whether or not the key ingredients are being replicated time and time again. And fidelity is the degree to which, if it's done on multiple occasions in different sites, is it likely to be the same? And I guess a business that, where we kind of can see that would be a franchise, and I'm not going to say any other big brands in case that gets us in trouble. And
disclaimer on Coca-Cola, it's great, it's very refreshing.
Oh, and can I just want to add, I am the first, as an endurance athlete, I'm the first 4 hours in to be reaching for the Coke as part of my nutrition strategy.
100%.
So I do not in any way want to diss Coca-Cola or its place in hydration. But I also want to marry that up. Like Coke plus water plus electrolytes, maybe. Something like that.
Sorry, that's just me trying to be funny too, because actually you brought up something really important there, which I think is another strategy maybe for people when we are thinking about cultivating belonging, which I'll hopefully get to when I go round in this little way that sometimes my brain does. So, I guess mechanisms for that integrity and fidelity stuff through not only organisations, but in our own lives. And that belonging in myself could be that I need to check in throughout the day at little touch points of my day. Am I actually the same, in those actions with what I wanted to be about today? Is the core of what I'm doing what I set out to be about today? So there's little fidelity and integrity checks that we can do. And, they do need our gut. They do need us to check in and feel that genuineness that Dennis is talking about. The other thing that got thrown up for me with what Den was saying is how courageous this journey is, because it's not easy, and we all, I think the majority of humans set off thinking, I want to do a good job today. And, when we find ourselves in conflicts with others or feeling a sense of unbelonging, I don't believe that people have set off thinking, I'm going to make other people's lives hard today, or I'm going to really try and, be off the page with everybody. That's not what we're hardwired to do. We started this chat with a really accurate recollection by Dennis that all of us are hardwired to fear rejection and abandonment. That's the reality. We are a herd species. We still need each other, as annoying as each other can be sometimes.
People prey on that, right?
Yeah. So I guess my thoughts around maybe back to the Coke is beware of the tiny quenches. So we do these little things in our life and we get a tiny quench. We feel quenched for 5 minutes, 30 seconds. And we started with a good intention, just like we've started our day in the hope of making a difference, getting on with people, achieving some important goals. The tiny quench is something that we do because we feel thirsty, we want to kind of quench the thirst. But if we kind of like can be okay that to notice discrepancies, you know, and so that's like very much like disagreeing doesn't have to equal disconnection, just as a discrepancy in my body's experience. I had some fizzy drink, and for a couple of seconds, it was really nice in my mouth, and I noticed it go down into my body, and I felt quenched. But then after 30 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever, I felt different. If we can notice those discrepancies,
yes,
then we can actually, you know, just be kind of like, well, what else? You know, what else? The thing that humans can sometimes do is like we get really protective of our discrepancies and you know, and maybe of not seeing those discrepancies. And so like whether that's about it's uncomfortable for us to realize that when I spoke in that meeting and where we were, you know, our value is respect and I was disrespectful, well, it's, you know, that's not my fault, you know, they did this to me first or blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden we've got this gap. And so we have the us and the them. Instead of going, oh, there's a discrepancy there. You know, there is this kind of difference in what I set out to do, not be thirsty, have a day where I make a difference, feel a sense of belonging, take my seat at the table, you know, and be there for the common good. We get really locked in and then defended. So there's a lot of D words coming up today. We've got like disconnect, disagree, discrepancy, and then, you know, I guess we dig in. There's this digging in that can happen. And I suppose back to maybe that kind of question about policing and that beautiful camaraderie that is in organisations like that, because the experiences that humans have, they can kind of be a thing that we can share and belong over. And that was one of the amazing things in that job, where because you're walking through things that are really trying, you know, they're very difficult. You can connect and feel that sense of shared understanding from people that have had similar journeys. The tricky thing, I guess, in policing, and I was in there just after the Royal Commission in New South Wales, is that sometimes because of the discrepancies between experiences of people and other people, we can get locked into that sort of us and them, and then it's sort of like that lip service or the tiny quench becomes unhelpful because it keeps me stuck with a belonging that's along with these police, and that might be drinking every night after a shift, or it might be getting together and talking about how all those people are assholes, or, you know, and I'm not saying that that's what police do, but it could be a way, you know, that we maintain our belonging.
Yeah.
But it's a tiny quench because I need to walk through the community and I, you know, I want to feel a sense of connectedness with all of the others, you know, and not just those people who have this thing in common where it's not a disagreed belief or a disagreed experience. And you're right, you know, when you leave, and I know Em has worked heaps with elite athletes, and that's my understanding of, you know, some of your work too, Dan. When I lose that experience in my life and that thing that I've been doing where I've got belonging, then what? And that's the trouble with us and them. It's a tiny quench, you know. It doesn't really lead to that full combination of fizzy drink, water, and electrolytes that Em was talking about. Sorry, many words again.
I'm the first thing that's kind of standing out to me is this idea of sometimes we think because I belong here in this group with this people in this community, I'm excluding myself from this community and this group of people over here. So what happens is belonging becomes territorial.
Mm.
Belonging becomes a vehicle with which we exclude ourselves. You know, and it's like, I'm on this side and everyone else on that side is wrong and bad. And, you know, and this might be getting super philosophical here, but belonging at its essence doesn't have any boundaries. It doesn't mean I belong to this family or this nation or this community or this species, right? Belonging at its essence, like if people have a true experience of belonging, they actually have no border between them and others. It's this sense of absolute oneness.
Yep.
And that might sound a little woo-woo or whatever, but there's actually a whole bunch of neuroscience about oneness.
Yeah.
And oneness isn't this mystical thing that we need to go and sit on a mountaintop to achieve, and it's, you know, all about religion and spirituality and whatever. Oneness is actually a state that allows the human to thrive in its potential, because instead of seeing me versus this person, this group, whatever, it's me as this unbordered experience, this sense of I belong fully, I belong everywhere, with everyone, with everything. And that creates a kind of psychological wellness that's really quite unparalleled. And it's really hard for us to stay in that space as human beings, because there is division and feelings and whatever, and we're human. We can't live in oneness 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But my hope is that people at least experience it periodically in a way that they've got a reference point for it. Oh, I know that it's hard, but I know how to come back to this experience of oneness. I have a strategy, I have mechanisms, I have processes. And that can look everything from formal meditation practice to spending time in nature, to doing psychedelics. Like, there are so many different ways that people arrive at that, and none are better than the other. So that's one thought I'm having. The other is a very practical thing, and I don't know if I'm sort of going a bit too deep in the behind the scenes of the Discovery Collective here, but what I have noticed to be extremely powerful in our trio is our ritual of welcoming each other back. And so when one of us deviates or goes on a detour because something's happening in our own life, or because we're having a bad day, or because the world has just erupted, or whatever the case may be, we have a ritual of welcoming each other back.
Yes.
And I think a lot of teams and organizations don't do that. It's like if somebody in the team's not firing on all cylinders, or they're having a bad time, or they're living outside their values, we exclude and we put up barriers to that person. And when that person eventually finds their way home again and is having a better day, and things in their personal life are better, and they're living more aligned with their values, and they're being productive, we don't welcome them back in ways, and we miss that opportunity. And so I think if leaders and teams and organizations and collectives can have ways of, hey, I noticed that noticed that things weren't right for you for a while, and that's totally fine, and also welcome back. It's this unconditional thing. So that was, I guess, another element of what you were saying, and how people can practically implement that. And then my final thought here is that all of what you're saying, Dan, and all of your ideas, they're premised on the idea that we actually have some kind of awareness, self-awareness and other awareness. And so I think if someone's at a real starting point, that's a really beautiful starting point. Because how can I know to come back to belonging if I'm not aware I've left? And I think that we owe it to the teams and collectives that we're working with to take ownership and responsibility for cultivating our own self-awareness, because without it, we're not able to engage in practices of belonging. Or it's very hard for us to engage in practices of belonging because we don't have a foundation of self-awareness or other awareness. So self-awareness is what's happening in me in this moment, what's going on in my body, what's going on in my thoughts, what's happening for me. Other awareness is what's happening between us right now.
Yes.
How are we traveling right now? What's happening in this space between me and you? And I think that what I love about our work is that those are the kinds of tools that we are offering to leaders and organizations as a foundation for them to engage in practices of belonging. And that how can we expect to have true belonging within teams and organizations and families and communities if we haven't had an opportunity to experience belonging within ourselves? And, Dan will always hear me speak about the fact that this idea that we're one homogenous self is actually just wildly inaccurate. We have all of these different parts. So, the same Emily doesn't rock up to our Discovery Collective meetings every day. You get different versions of me, different shades of me, because I'm a whole complex being, as are both of you, as are the rest of the world. So what my task is how do I create belonging among all of the versions of me? When I notice that there are parts of me that are bubbling up that I don't like, how can I foster belonging with those parts of me that I don't like? And if I can do that, I actually have a reference point for offering belonging to my team when there are parts of my team showing up that I don't like. I'm like, oh, I know how to do this because I've just done this for myself. I don't abandon my team just because they're not doing something I don't like, just like I don't abandon myself because a part of me is bubbling to the surface that I don't like. This is the kind of unconditional love thing that we talk about with parents and children.
Yeah.
Is that you can not like someone for a minute, you can be angry and annoyed with someone for a minute, but that connection of love or that connection of belonging is never broken, no matter how much I don't like you in this moment. And again, that's an art form. And a bit of a shout out to the folks here, and it's kind of coming up in my mind now, is if that's not an experience you had early on, it will be harder for you to, and I think that's definitely been my own journey, is I've had to work really hard at that. That's not something that was modeled for me a lot. So again, just noticing that we all start in a different place. And just because some person has had lots of great experiences of belonging in their life and they're able to do it really well doesn't mean that your colleague next to you has had that same rich opportunity. And we need to honor that level of diversity in our team and know how that we can work together, even though our experiences are different.
That's really powerful, because that brings me to nature. So the strength of the wolf is the pack, and the strength of the pack is the wolf. And a wolf will always protect the most vulnerable in the pack. You'll see that in the line, and they work, and there's an acceptance of who and what everyone brings. But even though I may not show up as my best version of myself today, I know that I'm protected by both of yourselves. But we also have to be careful that when we're vulnerable, people can sell belonging very, very well, like that quenching drink that we talked about. Because if you have that drink on the beach, everybody runs around and they're all good looking, and it's like you're part of this wonderful thing, and it can be cultish. And belonging sometimes, when it's not done with the right intentions, can actually be potentially more damaging. Because if people have felt betrayed in what they thought was a sense of belonging, it can be really damaging. And you said earlier, I could be part of that one team. If I'm part of that team, they can't be part of this team. And that's happening a lot right now in terms of these narratives. And so there's a let's talk about a belonging bias potentially occurring.
I just noticed a thing, this is the funny thing about language too. Pray, that word pray has come up twice, or at least twice. And it's like, but my brain's going pray, and then we can spell it two ways, P-R-E-Y, which is prayed on, and then pray. And in the case of, people coming together for faith, and like spirituality, whether that's through an organized religious place or whether it's, my spirituality is walking in nature or being at the beach. in some ways we talk about praying, and that is about the oneness, you know, and wanting to have that experience sense of belonging. And then, you know, our language is so funny at times. Like, then there's the praying on that in that state that we might be like vulnerable to being preyed upon because we're praying to belong. So, interesting. So I guess the message that I take out of that is that it's not wrong to want to belong either. And I guess, and the tricky thing is following on, you know, I guess with what Em was saying too, that for individuals and statistically it's somewhere around 40%, but my own life experience thinks that could be underestimate. Of how many people haven't had necessarily great experiences of safe, empowering, connected, you know, I guess competent belonging with other people. It's actually sometimes can make us lose faith in us, you know, and so when we think about that self-awareness, the mindset or the thinking that can come from that is, oh, what's wrong with me? You know, why is it that everyone else seems good at this stuff, but I can't? You know, why am I unlovable? What am I too much? Am I not enough? Am I, you know, all the not good enoughs that really, again, we're biologically primed to think about, and some people more to think that it's them, and others are a little bit more likely to think it's the others. But what I was thinking when you were talking about our welcome back, it's not dependent on a penance. You don't have to kind of show up and do something to be welcome again, and that doesn't mean, you know, I guess putting a mum hat on. My 3 young men have been the source of my biggest, you know, continued growth. It doesn't mean that we don't empower people to make right what was wrong, you know. So it's not about, oh, no consequences and no one ever has to kind of like, you know, change their behavior. It's definitely not that. But you don't have to kind of do some penance or show that you're worthy to come back. But I noticed, you know, even this morning with all my tech issues, I was going to do like, oh, sorry guys, just be without me today. I'm too chaotic, not enough. But then I noticed the thoughts, but what helped me stay, so that kind of work, you know, Em was talking about in the self-awareness, is that I've got little now kind of wobbly programming, you know, that I need to do penance on myself, you know, like I'm not kind of welcome and maybe I need to spare people from me. So that's some of it too, you know, that get to know that stuff and get to know the spaces where hopefully there's 1 or 2 people that even when yourself is saying, oh, I'm not worthy, you know, I should do some penance to go back to that. Just try and, you know, show up as much as you can, so that, because, you know, changes with behavior changes thinking. The feelings that show up, they're not good enough, change too when we can do different things. But that's the kind of the discrepancy stuff again, you know. it's not my job to kind of buy into that. It's not my job to get rid of those thoughts, but I got to kind of be able to keep going even though there is that am I worth it discrepancy happening.
Yes,
exactly. Yeah. And I'm like, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the parallel between my work with mums and babies and what we're talking about in terms of belonging in the adult world and in very professional kind of esteemed fields and organizations, is what we talk about in kind of infant neurodevelopment in terms of how the infant's brain develops. Is what we notice is that love isn't known to the infant when they're born in the way that we think it is. So love is a learned language. And I would say here that belonging is a learned language. And some of us, unfortunately, weren't taught it very well as young folks. And what I see in the high performance world as someone that works with leaders and athletes and high performers is there's lots of people in the high performing world who also weren't born with or weren't lived early with environments in which they got taught the language of belonging, because it is a language, and they might have maybe not been taught it at home, or they might not have been taught it at school. Lots of experiences of not fitting in, of not being enough. And so if as leaders we can think, oh, hang on, there's a few people in my team, they don't seem to have had enough opportunities to learn the language of belonging in their life. Okay, I'm going to notice that. And then as a leader, I'm going to help them learn that language. And just like we learn any language, we do it through repetition. And we do it in small doses. And we try and think of the most effective way to learn the language. So as a side note, we now look at how people learn language now compared to when I learnt language at university, kind of however long that was, 20 years ago. It's actually changed. We know that the way we teach language is a lot different now. And as organizations think about how can you empower your team to increase their capacity and depth of understanding around the language of belonging. And you do this meeting by meeting, interaction by interaction, body language by body language, right? Don't store it all up and hope to teach your team belonging in one Christmas party at the end of the year. That's not how you learn French. And it's not how you learn the language of belonging. You learn it through small moments of repetition. And I can see that in our work as a Discovery Collective, every time we meet, every interaction we have, every conversation we have, we're giving each other little doses of belonging. Little dose here, little dose there, little dose there, until eventually what we have is a rich tapestry of belonging by the end of it. And so that's my, I guess that's probably another little word of advice to folks, is that that's what belonging is. It's a language. It's a language that we need to invest in moment by moment. If the two of you kind of sitting back and thinking about, we've had this really kind of rich discussion. It's gone in a lot of different ways. There's some entrepreneurial stuff. There's some psychology stuff. There's some science stuff. What's standing out to both of you listening to this conversation? What about you, Dan? What's your thoughts? What's standing out?
I think Virginia's hit. Well, you both have hit on. I think when you said there are no boundaries in belonging, Emily. It's very wholesome. It's genuine. It's felt. And Virginia said something about language. And earlier you said, what seems on one side, and then the word seem, I think of seem as a sewn join as well. So there's so many multiple ways to perceive things. So what seems to be belonging, or what's on one side, on the other, it can be very different. And I think there's we talk often about the need and desire versus needed versus the desire of things. I think belonging is very important, but don't give into something for the sake of being part of something. For me, as an organization, as an entrepreneur, as a leader, for me, my greatest goal is to provide a sense of belonging for people to really thrive in that place. But a lot of people don't feel deserving of it. And it's really important for me to really step back for those individuals and allow them the ability to feel that sense of worthiness. If I try to force the worthiness upon them, if I try to drag them in and make them feel part of it, it makes it really, really uncomfortable for individuals, because I want to be the savior. I want to be the person who makes them, feel that breakthrough. But the more I tried, so I've learned really just to really, be a little bit more patient, but allow that space for it to happen. But it has to come from a genuine intention. And that's, I think, on my final words on this subject, it has to come as a genuine thing. And if it's not, then don't try, don't push, let it just naturally occur. But think about it. Just feel it within yourself, and you know your gut. If it doesn't feel right, it often isn't.
You know what this is called, Den, in therapy? So both in terms of being a therapist in the psychological space, but also occupational therapist, thinking about what's called light touch work. So instead of coming in as a leader and doing all of this stuff and like dragging people along, and it's actually the best therapeutic techniques or treatments or moments, just like the best leadership moments, I believe, are light touch moments.
You will belong doesn't really work.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's just,
or you're going to get fired.
Right. It's actually, as a leadership, there's a real subtlety here, and
Yes.
Belonging is the natural state. It's what we want. It's homeostasis for the individual. And so all you're doing is just lightly touching and lightly offering something here and there to help the individual return home to their sense of belonging. V, any thoughts about pulling all of this together? What's standing out to you, thinking about this conversation as a whole?
Yeah, I'm competing with someone else on an unstable Wi-Fi. So I think I dropped out for a tiny bit and rejoined. So apologies for that.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
That is what belonging is. Welcome home.
Yeah, I guess that probably is one of the essences of what I will take away from today, and hope that, others might too, is if we can see the world in circles like that, maybe wandering off and exploring the world, and then, people returning back to safe havens and secure bases, to places where they feel a sense of belonging. That's a really nice way to think of it. And then if we're trying to be that place where people can belong and thrive, because all of this is, not just about belonging for the sake of it, though I would be happy with that world. We are interested in optimal functioning. We're interested in growth and well-being and people realizing their full potential. The job is maybe to stay still, rather than moving around or doing those big, like, overblown, welcome, you're welcome, you need to feel welcome.
Yeah.
And then somebody goes, whoa, and moves away. And then we can get that rejection thing going on too. And we're like, oh, well, I just did a big thing and you went away, so now I'm moving. Being the anchor, kind of trying to stay steady in the knowledge that what you're standing on, if you really believe it, that's going to take time, and let the person do a circle, let them come back. Mm-hmm. I guess one other thing that I would love, for everyone, and will be my afternoon reflection, is actually to try and allow themselves, almost in that visual way that Em was talking, roll through all those memories in your life, where you feel like there was a sense of this, and you were on the cusp of it, or it felt like maybe a time that stood out, the kitchen table for Dennis, being with family at Christmas, or whatever it is, it could actually even be tucked up under the mulberry tree with a blanket over you when you were 7 years old, and it was you and nature. But then register in your body what that felt like, because that's the internal barometer of belonging for you. And no matter what the world does, no matter how wobbly it gets, how divisive, how confusing, disintegrated, discursive, any other D word we want to chuck in, you've got the data then in your body to say, oh, that's what I'm seeking. Because you'll have it, and then that, it's not when you go somewhere and it's not there, it's an unbelonging space. It's not that you're not capable or that you're not welcome or you're not worthy. It's actually, maybe that's not right.
Yeah.
Because every human has the right to feel that sense of safety, comfort, okayness. And if it's not feeling like that, I guess I don't want any of us to ever feel like, oh, that's a me thing. There's something flawed about me. It's actually data, and it might mean I need to get better with some of my own discrepancies or the things that kind of make me go into a situation feeling not welcome or whatever. But we know it, we have it, and even if that's in a space that's not to do with people, your body has recorded that data.
And maybe that's a beautiful way to kind of conclude this, is that invitation for people to really rest on the wisdom that lives inside their body and their mind, and really be able to use the body as a barometer to know when there's belonging and when there's not, and to set belonging as one of those anchor points within your life and within your team and with your organization. It's like how, instead of just looking towards kind of outcomes, business outcomes or life outcomes or personal outcomes, let's also look at belonging as its own thing that we're orientating towards. So let's look at it as a thing that's on our agenda, that's this living and breathing commitment to empowering everybody within your team, within your collective, within your life, to learn the language of belonging. So I'm really blown away by our first trio conversation as a Discovery Collective. I feel the wisdom in this virtual room, and I feel the importance of these conversations in our current moment in time. And my hope is that for whoever's ears this is landing on, is that it's offering them something. It's offering them insight or perspective or strategies, or just some little offering that can land in their earbuds and kind of make their way into their minds and their souls in a way that's helpful. And I really look forward to us continuing to have these conversations, not only because it brings us together and allows us to sort of really refine our thoughts and ideas, but hopefully because these ideas can land on other people's hearts and minds and guts in ways that supports them to move forward towards well-being, growth and leadership. Thank you both for being here and being part of this. What a lovely first trio conversation, and I so look forward to the next one.
And welcome, Virginia. So lovely having you on this platform with us. And
thank you.
So good.
Thanks so much. I mean, you do a beautiful job at kind of facilitating and hosting. I'm very impressed with those skills.
She's very clever.
Well, here we are, all learning and developing and growing our skills. How wonderful!
In 3 different parts of the country as well, which is amazing. So
exactly, fostering belonging across this big nation of ours, and hopefully it's landing on people in a way that's helpful.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Have a
Take care, everyone.
great day. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.